Okay, we're now recording. So welcome, good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending the Parking and Enforcement Plan drop-in session. I'm just going to run through quickly the agenda for today's meeting. So we'll start off, we'll do some introductions for the panel, and then my colleague Elliot will go through some housekeeping and the ways in which you can participate today. Then there'll be a short presentation on our proposals. And then for the rest of the session, there'll be a chance to ask questions directly to our panelists. If we have time, we'll also do some poll questions. We'll just give us a chance to find out a little bit more about the people attending today. So I'll just start with introductions. I'll start with myself. My name's Sarah Slade. I'm the Project Support Officer for the Parking Policy team. Elliot.
Hi, everyone. My name's Elliot Smith. I'm also a policy support officer for the parking policy team.
Thank you. Kostika?
Hi everybody, my name's Kostika Nachibi. I'm the Policy and Programme Manager for Parking Services.
And Michael.
Good morning everyone, my name's Michael Ben. I'm the Deputy Head of Parking and Markets at Hackney Council. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say that we do have some moderators from our team in the chat function as well. Their names are Eloise Grimes, Mariana Guerrera, and Mark Collins, and they'll be answering any questions that you have if you want to put those in the chat. I'm just going to go over to my colleague Elliot now, and he'll take you through some housekeeping and just the ways that you can participate today.
Hi everyone. Firstly, welcome to the meeting today. So there's just a few housekeeping rules to go through before we get started, so we can make sure this session is productive, useful, and a good experience for everyone. So can we please keep the language respectful, including no swearing or abusive language. If anyone continually uses any of this language, we will remove you from the group. Please respect the fact that there are other people that will want to ask questions. So because of this, we will likely limit you to one question at a time. And if there's at a time, if there are people in the queue asking questions. Also, no spamming in the chat, please. If you are spamming the chat, we will also remove you. I'll also go through the functions that you've got today on Zoom. So or you've got a chat function which should be on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. You can use this chat function to ask questions or make comments, and the moderators will make note of all the comments made in the chat box. The questions that you ask in the chat box will be transferred over to the Q&A function. You can either ask them in the chat box or put them straight into the Q&A function. In the Q&A function, the questions will be answered on video by the panelists. And when the question's been answered, I will mark it as answered. So you'll see that it's been answered. You can also, if you would like to speak using your voice, you can use the raise hand function, which is also at the bottom of the screen. You'll be then unmuted by the host, who's either myself or Sarah. And this will give you time to ask the question. There'll also be a number of polls, so they'll only pop up for a short period of time. So please just answer the question on the poll, and then we'll close the poll and share the results. And as Sarah said, the meeting is going to be recorded and uploaded to our Citizen Space webpage.
Thank you very much, Elliot. I'll hand over now to Kostika, who's going to just take us through a presentation on the Parking and Enforcement Plan proposals.
Hello everyone, just 1 second while it shares my presentation. Just want to confirm that you can see the screen.
Yes, we can, Kostika. If you could share it, that'd be great.
Let me start again. Sorry, I do apologise. I'll try that again. Just want to confirm again, can you see the screen, the sharing screen?
Yes, we can see that.
Yes.
Lovely. Okay, so today we're here, sorry about that. Today we're here to talk about the Parking Enforcement Plan. So what is the Parking Enforcement Plan? Who does it affect? The PEP is a principal policy and a strategy document for the parking services, and it also describes the plans and visions for the service over the next 5 years. It outlines a set of objectives and recommendations which we will be working towards and how we propose to do it. The document affects anyone that lives, works, visits or parks within Hackney. In the beginning of the lockdown, there were fewer motor vehicles travelling our roads, polluting the air, and this behavioural change benefited from all of us because it basically meant that more people used sustainable modes of transport or stayed at home and the air was cleaner because of it. The council is working to extend this change by rebuilding Greener Hackney to avoid a car-led recovery that we feel would impact the lives and health of Hackney people in a negative way. Our vision is set out with 5 key visions, and I will go through them here now. The first one's to support the creation of sustainable streets for everyone by prioritising more of our curbside space to support greening in the borough and sustainable transport. The second one, to provide high quality customer focused service that responds to the needs of our residents and businesses and visitors. The third is to encourage motorists to choose active travel and sustainable travel options or switch to cleaner vehicles with a reduction in private vehicle ownership. The fourth is to consolidate a fair, proportionate and transparent enforcement service to deliver high levels of compliance and robustly tackle fraud within the borough. And the fifth is to deliver a consistent approach to parking products and services on all Hackney housing estates. So how are we going to do this? We're consulting right now, and the consultation is going to be over a period of 13 weeks, ending on Monday, the 15th of November. We're holding multiple drop-in sessions to ask the public. The public can ask parking managers various questions. We're holding show and tells throughout this period, and we're also doing things where you can submit questions to the team, and it'll be answered by our managers in a video recording session. But some of the key proposals are as follows. We have the hierarchy of parking needs. Now, this is how we distribute the parking across the service, across the borough, in terms of what is our priority. At the moment, it's blue badge. It was before, and it continues to be blue badge holders that are at the top of that hierarchy of parking needs. But what we've added in this PEP and reprioritised is ultra low emission vehicles. So that's anything that's electric or zero emission vehicles. Car clubs, we've reprioritised them because we want people to go to car clubs instead of using their own private car, followed by residents. And then we've also got public sector organisations. We're prioritising that and the work that they do in the borough, followed by local businesses and short stay shoppers and visitor parking. There are other factors that affect how we distribute parking in the borough, and they are the impact on traffic flow and road safety, the impact on air quality and climate change, and the size of a vehicle and the effects that vehicle may have on the local environment. What's new to the PEP is the hierarchy of curbside space. And what we wanted to do is look at how we distribute the bays within a street and what should take priority. We've developed 3 areas of priority. The first is essential curbside space, which looks at personalised permit bays, which are disabled bays specifically for one disabled resident. We've got registered disabled bays, which are ones that are put in for residents, but anyone with a blue badge can still use them. So they're likely to be in residential streets opposed to next to local centre hubs like Dorstone or Mare Street. We've got generic or general use disabled bays, electric parking bays, floating car clubs, dedicated car club bays and doctors bays in the first priority. Priority 2 is sustainable curbside space. So this is looking at your cycle hangers. So not everyone drives, and we do need to distribute the space on the road for everyone. and not just the drivers. So we have cycle hangers, cycle racks, cycle hire only, cycle hubs, cycle containers, parklets, and greening alternatives. So there are priority 3, which is the desirable curbside space, and this is things like your resident permit bays, your permit bays, business bays, the things you would normally see in the street. So, motorcycle loading bays and so on and so forth. Those are the things that you would expect to see on a typical street, but the others are the things that we're thinking about having more of and distributing better. So if you're a Hackney resident, how will these proposals affect you? We've got free electric parking permits for all residents with 100% electric vehicles. Demand-led enforcement, this is putting our enforcement resource in areas where there is the problems. Instead of saying, 2 times, 3 times, or however many times a day, we would just patrol our streets, even in areas of Hackney where we know are 100% compliant or 99.95% compliant most of the time. We are looking at doing it more demand-led. So where there's a problem, we would focus our resources to those problematic areas to try and get people to be parking in compliance. We have a free e-Roma permit scheme, which is between the hours of 10 to 3, and that will basically be for electric vehicles only, and they'll be able to go across and park in permit bays across Hackney between those hours. We're reviewing the charging bands to increase them from 5 to 13. So currently, if you're a resident in Hackney and you've got a vehicle that is low emissioned, you may not see that shift that you would like to see in the permit price that you're paying because there's just not that many of them. And by creating 13 bands, what that will do would reward people for choosing better alternatives when they're thinking about buying a car or a vehicle. The diesel surcharge, we are doing a yearly increase on the diesel surcharge. It's important for us to outline these proposals now so we can give people the notice they need to make the changes they need to make to be more sustainable in their travel choices. Additional vehicle household surcharge. So for this one, we are basically, if you've got more than one vehicle in your household, you will be charged a surcharge for that vehicle. It's going to be introduced over a period of 5 years, and the increments are going to be introduced. First year, it's going to be no charge. Second year, it'll be 50% of the charge, and the final year will be 100% of the charge. And we're looking at doing £100 per additional surcharge each year. Car sharing permit for 2 vehicles. So you might have, for 1 vehicle and 2 parking zones, you might have 2 people that live in Hackney and they have 1 car that they share. Currently, if they have 1 car that they share, you would only be permitted to buy a permit in 1 parking zone, and we're now looking to change that. We're also supporting electric vehicle charging point infrastructure across the borough because we recognise that in order for people to make the switch, they need to have the facilities and infrastructure available to them to do that. And we are looking at reducing the use of visit vouchers by increasing prices for the more that you buy and having a variable price limit on some parking zones. If you're a blue badge holder, what do the proposals mean for you? So we are looking to open up blue badge bays and blue badge parking in permit holder bays across the borough. That is something that we have had feedback from our blue badge holders that this will be beneficial to them. It will be not just our blue badge holders, but all blue badge holders, whether you live in Camden Borough or Islington and you have a blue badge, it will be open to you as well, or your visitors. We're also looking at developing IT checks to support blue badge holders to make sure that the people that have the blue badge are using them correctly, which is really important. We're reviewing the companion badge, companion e-badge scheme just to make sure it's fit for purpose. And we're also securing parking for accessible and cargo bikes. So, we do recognise that at the moment there is that gap. But if you've got a cargo bike or you've got a disability and you need an accessible bike, there's not always necessarily the parking available on street for these bikes. So we're looking into that and doing something about it within these proposals. So if you live on a Hackney Council estate, the things that we're looking at doing is introducing emissions-based charges over a period of 5 years. It'll be a transitionary period, so it'll be incremental over that time, that will be expanding the banding from the 1 that it is, which is 1 flat price, to 13. Introducing a diesel surcharge, introducing 3 and 6 month permits. At the moment, if you live in a estate, even if you're there for a short time and you need a parking permit for your household, you'll only be entitled to a 12-month parking permit. So we want to align this to on street to introduce 3 and 6 month permits. Short stay parking where it's permitted. So we recognise that obviously in some estates where they're very small, this is not always going to be the case, and we're not always going to have the space to introduce short stay parking, but in others we might. So on a case-by-case basis, we're looking to doing that. And also the additional vehicle surcharge is something that we're looking at doing too. So for Hackney Council estates, the current extension of, well, what we're doing is extending the eligibility of current permits. So we have what we call a community support permit that we're looking to introduce. And we're also looking to introduce film vouchers, dispensation waivers, and business permits. Other key proposals for estates are that we're doing are conducting an audit of parking on all estates, aligning on-street and estate visitor voucher prices and allocations over a 5-year transitionary period, and supporting sustainable transport on Hackney housing estates. So if you work or commute in the borough, the transition towards 100% cashless or short stay parking, we're looking at that if that's feasible. 50p per hour short stay parking for all electric vehicles. That's something that if you work in the borough, you would benefit from if you're driving an electric vehicle. We're reviewing observation periods to make sure they're fit for purpose. With proposals for a market trader permit to support our local businesses and our market traders. We're the community support permit, the introduction of that. So at the moment, we've got the health and social care permit, but the community support permit is going to be replacing the health and social care permit, and also opening it up to more people so they can benefit from this permit and also support the residents of Hackney in doing so. We're also doing things like differential pricing structure for short stay parking based on location and emissions, and maximum stays in all car parks, and for EVC parking, so that's electric vehicle charging points. We want to make sure that we've got maximum stays so that people are not using electric charging points to park their vehicle only, they are actually using them to charge their vehicle so that other people can also benefit from that charge if they need to. So how can you get involved? You can contact us online by emailing us at parking.policy@hackney.gov.uk. You can join the conversation through filling out a consultation questionnaire at consultation.hackney.gov.uk/parking-services /PEP 2021 to 2026. Or you can also join in drop-in sessions, which we're doing today, or other ones that might that are happening in the near future, by also going onto the Citizen Space website and looking for PEP engagement. So that concludes my presentation. I'm going to pass back to Sarah, who will continue from here. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Gosifka, for running us through that. I'm going to open up the floor shortly. So if anybody would like to verbally ask a question, please raise your hand, or if you'd like to type it in the Q&A box function just at the bottom. While you're doing that, I'm going to pass over to Elliot, and we're just going to have a quick poll.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just going to put a quick poll up. So just answer it when it comes up. Should pop up on your screen. I'm just going to leave it up there for about 20 seconds, 25 seconds when everyone's answered. Okay, I think that's everyone's answered already. Thank you. Just going to end the poll now and share the results. So our poll question, do you own a vehicle? And the 100% answered car. So thank you very much for answering that poll question. Pass back to Sarah. I think we've got an attendee with their hand up in the chat, so
that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, Alice, you have a question. I'm just going to unmute you. Just bear with me. You should be able to ask your question.
Hi.
Hi, Alice.
Oh, yeah. So the question is about electric vehicles. I and a number of other people who are interested in sustainable transport around Hackney were quite alarmed to see the proposals for electric vehicle charging, and that's both resident permits and also the lower cost for short-term parking, which we feel strongly does not support the aim to avoid a car-led recovery. There's lots of detail behind that position, but we just I wanted to know how you could kind of feel that while promoting, obviously, electric vehicles are better than diesel or petrol vehicles, but they still cause road danger. They still have an environmental and climate impact. They still take up space, which can be given to the other modes of transport, which are higher in the transport hierarchy. They still mitigate against promoting active travel, for example, or take space away from potentially buses. And they also need to be parked and stored, obviously, on the street, which mitigates against the potential to actually reduce car ownership as well as car use. So all of those things, we feel very strongly that electric vehicles should not be treated differently. Yeah, so that was one of the main questions that I had. I do have others, but I'll leave it with that one for the moment.
Okay, Gosika, would you like to start with that, please?
Hi, Alice. Thank you for your question. So I do accept what you're saying in terms of, electric vehicles do emit emissions as well as petrol and diesel. But from our perspective, we do also recognise in parking services that there are people that do need to drive. We're saying that we would want people to choose other sustainable modes of transport, such as walking, cycling, or using shared alternatives like car clubs. But for those that do need to drive, we're saying if you do need to drive, then try and get an electric vehicle instead of thinking about a petrol or a diesel vehicle in its alternative. So, you've got some people out there that maybe have diesel vehicles or petrol vehicles, and it's who need to drive, and it's trying to get those people to switch to an alternative that's less damaging to our environment. In 5 years' time, the council's position may be different, but right now it's trying to get those steps and take those steps to get people on the journey that we all need to take with regards to air pollution and making the air a bit cleaner in Hackney and across the UK. Michael, I don't know if you want to jump in on that as well.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Alice. I think it's a very fair question to ask, and I think what I'd say, in addition to what Gosika has said, is that as part of a package of proposals, Hackney Council has got a very, very strong commitment to supporting active travel, and the work that we've done in expanding our low traffic neighbourhoods and expanding our school streets programme, and the support we've got for sustainable forms of transport in the cycle lanes that we're putting in place really is proof of how much we're working to try and help those people who want to choose sustainable methods of transport to be able to do so by removing many of the obstacles that have prevented people from doing so. And within our parking proposals, we've also set out some very ambitious proposals to reduce the amount of vehicles that are driving into the borough. So, for example, around our short stay parking, where we currently see nearly 1 million sessions bought by people every year, we're looking to fundamentally change the way that pricing is set up for that, to discourage people from using vehicles for short journeys. But the fact remains that while 70% of people in Hackney don't own a car, we have about 40,000 vehicles that we've got permits issued to at present, and 0.8% of those are currently electric. And the pace of uptake of electric is slow at present. So obvious firmly that we're absolutely focused on supporting the move to sustainable transport, but at the same time, we do recognise that cars are not going to completely disappear from Hackney's roads over the course of the next 5 years. And what we want to try and do for those who do rely on a vehicle and for whom there really isn't a suitable alternative, that we've got the right pricing incentives in place to help those who want to make a greener choice to find it easier to do so. So I hope that helps answer that question for you, Alice.
If you have anything else, Alice, to add?
Am I still?
Yes, yep, you're still unmuted.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so there are a couple of things, and one is so in terms of the incentives, so this is a point that we'll be submitting to the consultation responses, that fuel is very much cheaper already, so the incentives are very much there. We certainly would agree that EV charging points would be helpful, but certainly not on the pavement. To those should be placed on build outs, not on the pavement. But I also think that that it would make a lot of sense to see the impact of ULEZ and how that will impact on the take up of EV before making a decision to give incentives for people to switch. Because I think what you're looking at here is an opportunity to get them to switch to not having a car at all, and that's a huge opportunity, rather than switching to an electric vehicle, which, as we've agreed, has all kinds of huge impacts on the environment as well as on health and so forth as well. So I think we feel really strongly about this particular thing, and yeah, I think you'll probably hear that from a number of other people going forward during the consultation. Yeah.
Thank you, Alice. Look, I welcome your views, and I'd say to you and also to everyone else who's on the call today that we really encourage everyone to make sure that you take part in the consultation, as well as obviously in today's session. I would also add that Parking Services is a really strong advocate for the move to sustainable transport, and actually we took over the management of the borough's cycle hanger program a couple of years ago because we saw obvious synergies with the services we're providing on street, and an opportunity to help people who want to be able to move to cycling more regularly to be able to build up that service. And we've now got by far the biggest number of on-street cycle hangers of any London borough. We've also got the biggest car sharing program in place through Zipcar, which is helping people try and transition away from owning their own vehicle as they move to more sustainable forms of moving around the borough and around London. So it's very much one piece in an overall package of measures to try and help people to move away from owning vehicles because they've got really strong and viable alternatives for them, and trying to make sure that we're removing barriers wherever we can to help people to make those more sustainable choices. I look forward to receiving your feedback, Alice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alice. If there's nothing else, I'm just going to go to Sue. So I'm just going to allow you to ask your question, Sue.
So hello everyone. Yes, so mine follows on from Alice's question, which is obviously it's encouraging the free parking for electric vehicles. I agree with Alice totally, but it's also encouraging the social inequality to me. You're more likely to be wealthy if you can immediately swap to an electric car. So it's almost like incentivizing wealthy people to buy their super huge vehicles. And it really doesn't have any parity with, you know, sort of if you actually hire a cycle hoop from Hackney, you will pay £42.50 per year plus a £25 deposit for a key, you know, and Hackney effectively will be making £45.50 times 6 out of each parking space where a cycle is parked, while giving, you know, somebody who can, you know, afford a super huge Tesla free parking. It really just, you know, it kind of, there's enough divisions in Hackney without kind of making, you know, sort of car ownership a further, you know, sort of even the idea, you know, sort of like driving's a privilege, not a basic human right, you know, and generally people who choose to drive to work, and I'm not saying that it's not a convenience, you know, but the least wealthy are quite often taking 3 or 4 buses to work, you know, sort of, it's, you know, I've got a friend who was, you know, who has a car, who could afford to drive to herself to work because it was kind of a part-time job, whereas her, you know, for her it's a temporary filler job, whereas the people who were actually doing the job on the £8.50 wage were taking 2 or 3 buses. It's totally inequitable, and it's a bit shocking from a Labour council to come up with this. And then once the idea of free parking for electric vehicles is embedded in the psyche of the car driver, you'll have the same LTN fiasco all over again, where people kind of think it's their right to have free parking, and you'll end up, you know, sort of, you know, potentially in court about it, you know. So I think it's a shockingly poor idea that encourages, you know, sort of like social inequalities. And it's, you know, sort of, if I compare it to the price, you know, I've got a car and I have a bike, you know, and the price that I'm going to be able to park my electric car for free, and, you know, my bike I'll pay for. It's, you know, it's just, you know, ridiculous in my opinion.
Michael, would you like to respond?
Yes, Sue, thanks very much for your comments. I think the challenge with the cycle hanger scheme is that the cost of each of the individual units, they cost £3,000 each, and they've got a limited shelf life until they need to be replaced. It means that unfortunately we're not in a position to be able to offer those free of charge, and we also need to ensure that where we've got those on street, that we've got residents who are actively using them, because I know there's a lot of frustration from residents where if there's no price attached, people choose to occupy the space even if they're not occupying it, and therefore we end up with vacant spaces and people who'd like to take the opportunity to benefit from that service not being able to do so because that space is currently allocated to someone else. But the broader point about making sure we've got the right pricing incentives to encourage people to make greener choices, I think, is a really important one that we'll take away and reflect on. And we look forward to receiving your and other people's feedback on our proposals around electric vehicles and other elements of the proposals that we can look to consider and then take forward amendments to any proposals based on people's feedback. So I appreciate your point. Thank you.
Hi, Gossika.
I just wanted to add to that, hello Sue, yeah, I just wanted to add that in terms of the proposals themselves, they are guaranteed for this parking enforcement plan, which is 5 years, after which they will be reviewed again if these proposals are approved this time round. So it's only for a duration of 5 years that we've said we would like to have free electric parking permits, after which it will be re-reviewed. And that's quite clear in the proposals that have been put forward.
Okay, Sue, I hope that answers your question. I'm going to go to Alice now. If you do have another question, please just raise your hand again. Alice, I'm unmuting you now.
Oh, hi, yeah. So I was just wanting to ask about the use of curbside space for parklets. I have a parklet, and I was lucky enough to get that in place during the Vanguard or the trial. I mean, we were hoping for this to become a whole lot easier, and I noticed that in there you talked about customer focused services, and I kind of feel like this is, or that statement is aimed at car drivers or drivers, but but because we haven't found it easy to apply or to try to use space for anything else, whether that's for street trees, on build outs, whether it's for parklets, or whether it's for cycle hangers. I'm not sure that customer focused service is there, and I would really feel that should be there. More generally, we feel, or I feel very strongly that there should be a target in the parking policy for reducing space given to parking over time. Parking is obviously, as you know, one of the most important tools in the council's toolbox for tackling all kinds of issues relating to the environment and health, and indeed social equity, as Sue's just mentioned as well, something I could have mentioned before, I guess. And the allocation of curbside or road space, so public space on the carriageway, I think is something that's just incrementally happened over so many years. It's just been given cheaply to car drivers who are, often those who are more wealthy, not always, obviously, but often, and that's something that needs to change, and that it would be really helpful to have something in that strategy to set a target for reducing space and to giving it to other things, whether that's rain gardens like's happened on Crossway recently, whether it's a street park, so where you close off a section of the street to create space for people recreational play, or whether it's for creating a cycle lane, for example, or whatever it is. I think that there really should be some kind of target in there for reducing the amount of space given to car parking, vehicle parking. So, yeah.
Corsica, would you like to go first on this one?
Hi again, Alice. Yes, thank you for your feedback. It's a good point, and it's something that we have recognised in this parking and enforcement plan, because we have introduced, like I said in the presentation, the hierarchy of curbside space, where we are recognising those that do not drive at all, and other sustainable modes of transport, like you were saying, in terms of cycle hangers, cycle parking, parklets, greening alternatives. So these are actually prioritised over the resident and a permit bays and the things that you would normally see on the street, to say that we would think about these things first when we're doing implementing parking zones or reviewing parking zones in the future that are already existing. We will look at, do we have enough cycle hangers? Do we have enough cycle racks? Are there anywhere that we can implement greening alternatives? Is there a request or a desire to have a parklet in the street that's going to be maintained by the residents who live there? So these things are at the key towards these proposals. But I do take what you were saying around, I take on board, and will take that feedback in with regards to reducing space over time to some of these alternatives. So maybe that's something that we can think about as part of this parking enforcement plan. So thank you for that.
Am I still? Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think the things that we're looking for are, number one, for actively promoting, not simply just waiting to see if somebody might kind of contact you in the hope. So, for instance, I just saw a tweet recently from somebody who'd gone to Belgium, where the businesses there had been asked if they wanted a parklet, and you could do that for businesses or for residents. So you create a scheme where it's easy, where you don't have to have planning permission, where you don't have to pay substantial amounts for insurance like we have to do, and that you make it easy. You don't just make it easy, you actively promote it. The second thing is that we can't see clear proposals for that, despite the fact that that's been promised. I think earlier in the year we had a promise from the mayor to say that there would be an application process coming soon. We need kind of clear and explicit proposals in there. And third, the issue about a target, so an actual target for reduction of parking space. So I think all of those three things would make us feel that it's not just a kind of ambition, but something that will actually happen over the next 3 years.
Thank you. Michael, would you like to come in on this one?
Yeah, I mean, just to say a couple of things in terms of parklets and the other changes to the curbside space that you were referring to. Those currently are the responsibility of our street scene department within Hackney Council, which is why we haven't got specific proposals addressing things that you're talking about, such as the simplicity of the application process and some of the challenges I know there are around the insurance and other logistical issues. But I know that they are working on proposals based on the existing schemes we've had in place to take the learnings away from that and look to refine proposals to make it easier in future. What we have got within the parking and enforcement plan is a clear commitment to support the delivery of that up and down the borough, and we've been doing this on an ongoing basis to both help facilitate parklets, to facilitate the removal of curb space, to reuse it for pocket parks and other options where we're able to secure the funds to do so, and also to massively expand cycle parking provision. So we've done an awful lot over the last 2 years to make all of those things happen, because we're absolutely on board with the overall objective of reducing the use of curbside space for vehicles. I think in truth, there's an awful lot of people curbside space is those of the vehicle owners. And we need to change people's mindsets around that, and start demonstrating, as we have done in many different parts of the borough, what 21st century streets are going to look like in Hackney, and how it's going to enable everyone who lives on that road to have facilities and services that benefit them, and not just the 30% who happen to own a vehicle. So that's something we'll absolutely be taking forward. In respect of a target, I can't recall, in all honesty, whether or not there's a target included within our sustainable transport plan, which Street Scene led on. I'm looking at Goska to see if she can recall whether or not there is a target in there. But if there isn't, then I think that's something that absolutely we need to look to consider to give ourselves an ambitious target to take forward over the next 5 years.
Well, that would be great.
Okay, if there's nothing else to add, I'm going to go to Sue now, who's got her hand raised. Okay, Sue, you should be able to speak now.
Yeah, I was just going to, I just had another thoughts, mainly for Mike, really, about the cost of the cycle hanger. So there's an administrative and infrastructure cost to parking on the road for cars as well. So there's an enormous amount of damage caused in Hackney as well to the actual pavements by, drivers mounting the curb, especially the dropped curbs, have become, cars and vans tend to run over them. Some of the roads around my area are a mess because of cars, so you're basically charging cyclists, to park, whereas, you're not even covering the cost of your wardens in a way by, donating free parking to electric vehicles, and, things like, pavement parking is becoming endemic in Hackney, it really, which is causing further damage to the pavement. So I just think it's such a poor idea. It's a little bit like free papers on the tube, they're given out free and people just don't appreciate them. They're discarded all over the floor. And it's like saying the value of that street space is zero, if you're in an electric vehicle, and it's interesting because there's currently discussions probably amongst people who like to make vast amounts of money, who are starting to regard parking space, the space that cars take up as valuable real estate, which is, there's a cost to administering, as you know, there's a cost to the infrastructure, there's a cost to the repairs. And what you're saying to car drivers is actually you're going to have it for free if you do us the favor of having an electric vehicle. Incentivizes people, and it's incentivizing the wealthy. To me it's just it's a poor idea. Things that are free aren't valued, and there's always a cost to somebody. Effectively, somebody who is on a lower income is paying for somebody on a higher income to park. Ultimately we all pay for our streets to be repaired, the pavements to be repaired. I just wanted to come back on that. It's, there's so many ways it fuels inequality. It's I could write a whole essay about it, and clearly you'll be receiving one from me.
Would you like to respond, Michael?
Stu, again, thank you for your contribution. I think, one of the takeaways from this session is very much about how looking at the pricing for the various different types of curbside space we have available, whether it be cycle parking all the way through to parking permits, and how that's structured, is something that we need to reflect upon. But I do still think that we have a challenge as a borough, and as a country more widely, around how we facilitate people to make green choices. And my concern, I suppose, is that if we aren't able to use the tools at our disposal to help people to make greener choices, that in 10 years' time we will still have a very significant proportion of combustion engine vehicles still in use on a daily basis within Hackney, affecting local air quality, continuing to have a detrimental impact upon our residents' health. And whilst the government nationally has obviously committed that new vehicle sales from 2030 will be electric only, we're still going to have an awful lot of second-hand vehicles, which will be sought after for a lengthy period beyond that. And I suppose it's really about how we fast-track improvements, particularly in air quality within Hackney. And looking in the round, we've proposed significant increases in the permit prices for the most polluting vehicles. We proposed introducing a diesel escalator fee, where the price for diesel vehicles will rise year on year, because we want to make very clear that continuing to drive large, high polluting vehicles in Hackney is becoming increasingly unacceptable, and it will become more and more expensive for people to choose to do so. Similarly, the changes we're proposing to make in regard of households which have got 2 or more cars, again, is looking to disincentivize people from having more vehicles than they own. So we're doing an awful lot in terms of the way we're managing pricing to encourage people to make greener choices, to move towards sustainable transport, to walk and to cycle more, using the huge investment we're putting in place to help them to do so. But there still will remain a significant proportion of people who will own a vehicle and will choose to drive. And I think the question that I suppose we're grappling with here is, what are the right mechanisms that as a council, we and other local authorities have got to help people to make the greenest possible choice for those who continue to look to drive. So I accept that perhaps the initial proposals haven't quite got that absolutely right, but I think that's what I'm particularly keen for your feedback, Sue, and Alice and others, to hear what people have to say on that particular challenge, so that we can take that on board.
Thank you very much for your question, Sue. I will move on now because we do have a few more hands raised. I'm going to go to, I think Alice was next. So Alice, if you'd like to ask your question.
Yeah, it was about the e-Roma scheme. I mean, I think I just want to emphasise that I don't support that on the same basis as everything else, because it's enabling car use. I really strongly don't support any introduction of enabling driving or short trips or anything. So that's just a statement, really. I mean, I could ask the reasoning behind it, but I'm actually more interested in asking a question about housing estates, because I would like some clarification. So it's great that housing estates are coming under controlled parking, and I just wanted to check if that will be all housing estates, and if the charges will be the same, because I'm not clear that the permits, the residential permits, are the same cost, or are they? I just don't know, I'm afraid, because I don't have a car and I don't live on an estate, and so I don't really know how it all works.
So the answer is, at present we control parking on about 94 estates, and historically the permit prices on estates have always been a flat fee, which currently stands at £39.50 a year. We're very clear that that needs to change, because we need to ensure that, in line with all of the other permits that we provide in Hackney, the pricing is based on tailpipe emissions of vehicles. So the proposal set out a 5-year transition towards changing the pricing structure to match that of on-street parking permits. Obviously, the lowest prices for those who are driving the least polluting vehicles will remain broadly where they stand at the moment, but for the most polluting vehicles, those prices could grow to several hundreds of pounds. So we recognise that, on our estates we've got residents who are often less financially able to afford significant price increases, and obviously we've got the impact of COVID, which is a factor in how fast we're looking to bring these proposals in. But we are clear that we need to ensure that everyone who owns a vehicle or drives a vehicle within Hackney is thinking about whether they need that vehicle, and if they do require it, the emissions that it's producing when they're making a decision about what they're choosing to purchase or rent, so we get people to make the greenest possible choices that we can.
That's great. So there's a couple of subsequent questions. One is, how many estates are not controlled, and were you going to try and bring those into control? And secondly, because that will probably see a bit of a hike in prices for those people. And I've seen on the Nightingale estate, which is near to me, that the introduction of controlled parking meant that suddenly a lot of people are using their front gardens to park where they do have them. And it's not only unsightly, but it's kind of removing the incentive to, it's just front garden parking is not great from many points of view, which I could go over. But I just wondered if you have introduced or are thinking about anything which will restrict people's ability to park in their front garden. And I know that you can restrict the ability to for them to drive over the footway. So do you have those restrictions in place, either for enabling parking in the garden or crossing over the footway? Sorry, there are two questions there.
Fine. So on the second question you asked there about front gardens and driving over the footway, I think I'm right in saying that we do have the ability to be able to issue parking tickets where there isn't a drop curb in place for people who've crossed over the footway. And I believe I'm right in saying that we've got a commitment as a council not to install dropped curbs upon request, but I'd have to find out more about that. So I'd need to come back to you on that point, if that's okay, Alice. So I want to make sure we're giving you the right answer to that question. So can you remind me what your first point was about the estates? Oh, yes, it was to do with
the number of estates that would.
Sure. So with the estates, we've got lots of estates which have got parking, and the vast majority of those which have got car parks within them we now control. There are others, many of which don't have any parking at all, so there'll be blocks which will be on residential roads, but we have got a commitment within our parking enforcement plan to undertake a survey of all the remaining estates to really understand what the situation is on the ground, with a view to obviously bringing those all under the fold of having controlled parking in place, both to make sure we can manage those effectively for the residents that live there, many of whom have suffered long-standing problems with their car parks being used by people who don't live there, which presents real challenges for residents who need to drive, but equally to make sure that we've got the right pricing incentives in place to help make sure that, irrespective of where people live within the borough, they're all considering the tailpipe emissions of their vehicle when it comes to the decisions they're making around vehicle ownership.
Thanks. And I think that if there are estates where it's not controlled, that it would also be really good to think about using some of that space. So when it's laid out, actually lay it out so that some space is reclaimed. So when it was introduced in the Nightingale, we just ended up with a situation where there are like 20 or 30 spaces which are not used, which could have been, thought of being given to reallocating that space either on a temporary or permanent basis. And often the layout of parking on estates is poor and makes very poor use of space, and it's not all needed. So I think that would be good to reference explicitly in the section.
We have committed to supporting the introduction of a greater range of sustainable transport schemes on estates. There's very limited provision, particularly of electric charging, but also cycle parking and pocket parks and other such investments. One of the benefits of introducing controlled parking is that then we've got a much better sense of what the current usage of particular estates is, which can really help us in highlighting where we've got vacant space. Then we can start getting our heads together and seeing what we can do to make better use of vacant parking spaces for a much wider range of sustainable transport and greening schemes. So
and simply consolidating the parking in one part of the estate rather than it being all over it is much often a better way to make better use of space.
Okay, thank you very much, Alice, for your question. I'd noticed we did have somebody else with their hand up, but that's been lowered now. If you do still want to ask a question, please just raise your hand. I see we have a question in the Q&A, so I'll go over to Elliot.
Hi, yeah. So we've got a question in the Q&A. When will these proposals be introduced? And I'll go over to Gossika to answer that one, please.
Thanks, Elliot. So in terms of the timeline of this whole process, we've got the consultation, which is ongoing up until the 15th of November, after which we'll look at the feedback and refine that feedback to then represent our findings to our cabinet, and that won't be until spring 2022. So it'll be around that time that we'll get some sort of indication as to what we've decided based on the feedback from the consultation to take forward to cabinet for their approval.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll pass back to Sarah now.
Okay, so we don't have any more hands up. Are there any more Q&As, Elliot? If not, we can do the second poll.
So we'll jump on to the second poll question. Just give me a sec. I'll get it up. So I'm just launching that now. So I'll just give you a few seconds to answer that question. Okay, I think everyone's answered that question now, so I'm just going to end the poll and share the results. So I see 2 of our attendees do not own a permit and 1 has an estate resident permit. We did have a comment as well that I think is probably worth addressing from one of our attendees. So I'm just going to read it out verbatim and ask for just a response. So he says, "This is pointless. All the points I've heard are one-sided. You talk about making Hackney a green neighbourhood, but by making all the side roads inaccessible, you're causing higher levels of pollution on the main roads. There's a proposal to make Stoke Newington High Road into a 2-way road, which would mean we would have 1 lane from Dalston all the way to Tottenham. This doesn't incentivise me to use public transport." Can I pass over to Michael to give us a response to that comment?
Yes, in terms of the specific proposals you're referring to, I'm afraid I'm not up to speed with the details of what are being discussed, I think, with Transport for London around that. But I think the broader point is that we have seen for many years now a growing volume of vehicle traffic on London's roads. And with the advent of much widespread use of satellite navigation systems, on people's mobile phones, it's become easier than ever before in recent years for people to try and find the quickest way from A to B, very often through our residential streets. And that is having a hugely negative impact on air quality in residential streets, road safety, and the council and councillors are hugely committed to ensuring that traffic which is travelling through Hackney, and we've done the analysis, I think I'm right in saying about 40% of vehicle traffic in Hackney at any given time doesn't originate in Hackney and doesn't end in Hackney. So it's just travelling through the borough, and it is polluting our borough. It's making our roads less safe, and councillors are committed to tackling that and have done so through obviously the low traffic neighbourhoods schemes, which obviously we're consulting on. We're keen to hear people's feedback on that as well, and the school street schemes to make it as safe as possible for for children to be able to walk, cycle or scoot to our schools. So, this is something that we're monitoring extremely closely, and there's lots of information on our website that highlights what the analysis is finding about the impact of these schemes on vehicle movements, both within residential areas and also on our main thoroughfares. From what I can recall when I last looked at it, the evidence is actually the overall number of vehicle movements has not increased, and there's been further work to try and address some of the challenges, particularly around things like the traffic lights at the Graham Road Mayor Street junction. So it's something that we're very alive to, and we want to make sure that we refine where we can to make it work as effectively as possible. But the commitment to ensuring that residential roads are not used for running purposes by vehicles looking to travel across the borough is one that councils are fully committed to, and it's something they believe very strongly about.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. I hope that answers that query. Oh, I see that there is a hand up, so I'm just going to go over to, sorry, I think that might be initials IHM. I'm just going to allow you to ask a question now.
Hi there. You just touched on my question.
Hi.
I totally get the point that you're making, but unfortunately, I live in a zone. I live in the zone E extension. I live behind Stoke Newington High Road. For me to commute from Stoke Newington High Road to the other side of Church Street, I have to use the whole high road all the way up to Manor Road by your proposition, because you're going to close Church Street in the next 2 weeks. This is adding extreme journey time. There's a road closure on Walford Road, which will mitigate all of this. It would take me less than 2 minutes to get back to my house, but now it's going to take me an extra 25 minutes because I have to use the high road to go all the way to Manor Road, round Clissold Park, around Newington Green to get to my house. This is ridiculous. I genuinely don't understand it. I might be one of the people who, may not share the same ideology as all of you guys here, but I'm a third generation Hackney resident. I understand that we need to have a greener neighborhood. All of these things are very relevant. I have kids. My children attend William Patton. I have to go all the way around to pick them up, which is fine. We don't drive as much as we used to. But to mitigate this, what I've had to do now is I've had to go buy a motorbike so that I can commute and get to work on time, because the public transport doesn't facilitate that. I'm always late for work. People don't get to, smaller businesses are suffering from this. The cleaners that used to come around to clean the privileged people's houses, they no longer come because they can't adhere to the time. So, I mean, like I said, I'm all for a greener neighborhood. I'm all for facilitating these things, but at the same time, man, you got to take the ideas of the masses. What this is expressing to me is an ideology of a few. Not everybody's privileged enough to be able to work from home, use a pedal bike, walk up and down Church Street with their kids on the weekend. Some of us actually work 7 days a week. I run a business, and like I said, I've had to now buy a motorbike so that I can commute and get to places on time. So fair enough, the road closures, cool. If you don't live in the neighborhood, you shouldn't be able to use the back roads. That's understandable. But I live on one of these back roads, on these side roads, like I mentioned. If I need to get to Clapton now, I have to go such a long way when I could be able to cross over Rectory Road, take a few rights and lefts, and ease of traffic. But I don't live there, so that's fair enough. I shouldn't be able to use that. But if I live on if I live on the back road, I live on Neville Road, I can't use Walford Road to access Neville Road. Now, if you could touch on that, that would be great, because I think at least the cameras should be smart enough to know that, hey, this vehicle lives in Zone E. He should be allowed to drive through there, because I'm a resident here. I'm a homeowner here. And I think there's, I understand it's new and it's going to take some, some time to get through all of these things, but that should definitely be one of them. If you live in a zone, you should be able to use the side roads at the end of the day and not have to make an extra commute to your time. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much for your feedback. Sorry, what's your name? Okay, well, nice to meet you. Look, I think the points you've raised are ones that I know that a number of residents feel, and I think whilst the responsibility for the low traffic neighbourhoods, the design and the schemes sits with our street scene department, what I'm very clear on is that, you know, the appetite is to try and make these work for everyone as best that we can. And there is an ongoing listening exercise going on at the moment, seeking feedback from everyone who's been touched upon by the low traffic neighbourhoods that we've got in place, to make sure that for people who it's both working for, but equally for those who it's not, we want to understand how it's affecting the problems it's presenting for you, to help take all that feedback into the round, to look at what we may need to do to make these work better in future. So I think, you know, questions around as it were, the rights of residents who live in areas surrounded by low traffic neighbourhoods, in terms of the sort of the access points around it, is an important one, and one that I'd encourage you to look to provide through the Hackney Council website, to make sure that feedback's taken on board when looking at how the scheme in your area is operating.
If there isn't any follow-up questions, thank you very much for that. Are there any other questions from participants? I don't see any other hands raised. Do we have any other Q&As?
There's no other Q&As currently.
Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, we've gone a little bit over our allotted time, but if anybody does have any more questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat. If not, I think we'll wrap up here. Thank you everybody for participating and joining us today. It's been really useful and we really appreciate all of your feedback. I'd just like to remind you, if you haven't done so already, my colleagues will post the link in the chat box to the online consultation that we're holding at the moment. So please do follow that link and put all your feedback as part of our consultation. Also, if you'd like to join another drop-in session, we'll be holding multiple sessions throughout the consultation period. So my colleagues will also put the link where you can log on and join another session for that. You can also contact the parking policy team who are running this consultation, and we'll put our email address and telephone number in the chat box as well. Do any of the panelists have any last comments before we go?
I'd just like to say thanks very much everyone for taking part. It's invaluable to all of us to hear your feedback on the proposals and how it fits in with what you feel that Hackney Council should be looking to do. So thanks very much for taking part, and we look forward to receiving your feedback as part of the consultation over the weeks ahead. So thanks very much for joining us.
And I echo that too. Thank you very much for joining us today. We welcome your feedback and thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Okay, thank you very much everybody for joining and participating today. I hope you have a lovely rest of the day. Enjoy the weather, and thank you once again. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.